Thank you again for stopping in. This is Larry DuBose at DuBoseWoodworking.com. You're in the second of a three-part series on making a bed. Now, this type of bed is going to take longer in order to make, and the way that it's built, it should be able to hold up not just for the family that it's being prepared for, but also for their kids and hopefully their kids as well. Looking at the most robust connections that I can make in order to have something that's going to be really solid and ready to last them for a long time. So as far as background on this first video, what we did was spent some time, if you're just joining us, showing how to mill these posts. Feel free to look at that one if you are just jumping in and then come up to speed here. Also feel free to join us. I'll bring you up to speed with where we are at. Second video, we're looking at putting everything together in order to make the headboard and the footboard, get the bed functional, and then the last part we have the final sanding, finish, and installation. So in this video, I'll be using some terms I want to make sure that you are familiar with. If you are conversant with woodworking, feel free to jump ahead to the actual build, see how some of the techniques are used, or if you're just interested in watching that, feel free to jump ahead. Otherwise, let me fill you in on some vocabulary I'll be using. So one of the words that you'll hear is going to be the word mortise. What is a mortise? A mortise is going to be a hole drilled into wood, and that hole is going to be to receive other wood for some type of wood-to-wood connection. So this is a mortise enabled to allow pieces of wood to be joined together. A mortise can also be joined, used for hardware. So you're going to hear that term used in the video here. This would be part of the rail that's going to connect the headboard and the footboard together. I'll drill a mortise in order to make sure that that metal is flush with the surface of the wood, and then it's going to be resting on the wood and not just resting on the screws themselves. There's also going to be a mortise drilled into the posts that's going to be receiving the hardware on that complementary end of the hardware. Okay, and that is a mortise. Now, in terms of the ways that I do mortises, I like to most times create my own wood pieces. You can get them already prepared. There's Festool makes these. They're known as dominoes, and they work great. They're handy. If I have a bed I'm making in walnut, a lot of times I like to create my own and then use those type of pieces of wood that I've milled up to make the connections. Here's one in a different project that I did in cherry. Then I can cut these to the size that I need them to be. Here's a little more wider or something that's a little more heavy duty. Okay, so that's mortises. So when these get used for this this called bedlock hardware, these are great for being able to take the bed apart and put it together pretty efficiently. The drawback to these, I'll touch on some drawbacks and then how I'm going to address those inside of the video. One of the drawbacks of these is that, okay, you got a nice connection here. These fit together. However, what that can be susceptible to is the bed is racking, or it forms a parallelogram instead of being nice and square. There's a couple ways that I work to overcome that being an issue. Second thing that is going to be a problem with these, or has been described as a problem, is something that relates to the way that wood grows and the type of grain that wood has. So wood has a couple types of grain. One of them is known as end grain. That's what you're going to be seeing right here. And picture end grain being, as the tree grows, what is connecting it vertically to the roots. So that end grain is allowing the nutrients to be drawn up into the leaves. The issue with end grain and the hardware that I'm using is that it doesn't hold screws as well, and over time people have reported that it can start to loosen up if there are not things done to overcome that. It is not a problem with screws holding into the face grain of the wood, which is, again, going to be perpendicular to that vertical surface. So as the tree is growing, that face of it that you're seeing in that grain, not an issue. So you'll find that what I do to overcome that is I drill dowels. I use oak dowels, and then the screw can bite into that face grain of the oak and be able to hold in really, really well. Okay. Other terms that you'll see me, actually other features of the bed itself, before I get into some of those other terms. Okay, you're going to notice these top vertical pieces here, and bottom ones on the headboard and the footboard have a core of white oak. I used white oak on this one to provide it a little bit more resistance against deflection over time. I picture a footboard, maybe a kid is jumping on that, or there's other stress to that, and if I have a wood that's a little bit more rigid, it's going to make a better product at the end of the day. Okay, a term that you'll hear me using inside of this video as well is something called book matching. What is book matching? Book matching is when you take a board, so let's say this is my board right here, and then you cut it in half, okay? And then when you open it up, you can see the symmetry, and it looks like you're opening up a book right here. So you'll notice that I take advantage of that on the rails here. I book match those so you'll see the symmetry on either side of the top and bottom rails of the headboard and the footboard. So with each one of those things aside, let's jump into our build. So first order of business, let me go back to that piece called the rails that was discussed inside of the introduction. The rails I'm going to cut to length here, and then I'm preparing all of the materials in order to create those rails. Which means I'm going to go ahead, cut those pieces to length, and then run over to joiner planer, make sure I got things at the appropriate dimensions, and then I can go ahead, glue those up, and wait on that. So as I'm getting ready for the glue up, I'm double checking that book match to make sure everything is in the correct orientation and that the rails of the headboard and the footboard are symmetrical once I end up joining those together. Another thing you'll notice is a lot more controlled in the application of glue inside of this video than I was in the first one. First video, I was nervous about camera setup, positioning, capturing the steps, and went a little quicker and got glue on more than I like to. Better example here of how to get this done. Now we have those rails for the head and footboard inside of the clamps. We're gonna make sure we got enough pressure on that all the way around. We're gonna wait on that, and we can work on some of the other aspects of this bed. And just a quick interruption here. Not a commercial, just to say I understand when I look in the background of my own videos, there's clutter here. You should see these being updated in the next several videos where I'm getting more organization just by necessity. Getting so many other people's projects finished up for them has really hamstrung some organization in my own shop. You get things out for one project and a second one, a third one, and before you know it, things are not looking the way that they should. So needing to find solutions. Here's one of them I found underneath of my bench, able to stack up the different tools and have a special place for them, so I can find them a lot quicker. And then underneath of my miter saw, also built this station here in order to more neatly organize the tools that are there. Keep tuned in the background for other updates that are going to be coming. But the one underneath of the bench, this was just all kinds of scrap wood. So used some scrap walnut that I had lying around for the faces here. Sycamore was the case. Some of the less quality pieces of that with a little more defects there, I'm fine using for just shop furniture. And then as far as the sides of the drawers, I used everything from cherry and maple and couple other species to make up the sides of the drawers, and then several different species to make up the bottom of the drawers, just so I would have something that's functional. And that's the main thing when you're looking at shop furniture: organization, and is it going to work for you. And then underneath of the miter saw, I built this cabinet unit with lumber storage on the bottom, a few places to organize my pack out boxes, and on top a place where I got handy measurement. The shelves that I used on this are a species of wood called black willow I've had for several years and found no other use for. It's really interesting type of wood. It's really soft, so most things I wouldn't be comfortable using it with. Shop furniture, no problem putting that to use there. Getting back to the build of the bed, I've taken the rails out of the clamps, and then I've gone ahead and put a piece of walnut right on top and bottom of those rails. I'm getting those off of the clamps. Purpose of these, I don't want any white oak to be visible when I cut the grooves and I insert the panels into those rails. I have that done, I can direct my attention to the headboard. I've selected the wood that I'm going to use for that. I'll cut it to length, and then in two different glue ups I'm going to prepare those for the headboard. At the table saw, I'm going ahead and removing as much as I can of that whitish or grayish color of the walnut to make the panel more consistent throughout. Okay, now I want to turn my attention back to the posts where I'm able to create the mortises where that bed hardware is going to sit. This type I decided to, as one way to help overcome that racking, I'm going to create a double mortise. So the first mortise is going to be where the wood for the rail is going to sit, and that's going to go in there 3/4 of an inch. And then just underneath that, I'm going to have the mortise for the bed hardware. You'll see what that is going to look like when I get done. This isn't a technique I've seen done before. If you guys see any advantages or disadvantages of doing that, biggest one I would see is it's going to take more time. But if it makes a better product at the end of the day and it prevents that racking and has something more, square, I'm glad to go for that. But yeah, glad to hear thoughts in the comment section, what you guys see as far as this section goes. So the way this works is I'm able to program in the exact dimensions that I want it to be, and this screen will tell me where to go, and it's going to be accurate to within 1/1000th of an inch, or even more accurate than thickness of a piece of paper. If I get off of track too far, this thing is going to retract so I don't damage my piece, or if I get a little bit off of track, it's going to compensate for that, and it's going to go exactly where it needs to go. Really neat, really versatile tool. Keep finding new ways to use this, and say the word game changer for stuff. This really is a game changer. Here you're seeing the screen that I would look at while I'm doing this, so I'm able to program depth of my cut, type of fit I'm using, a lot of different aspects, and then it's going to tell me what I've even cut up to this point. Now here's my chance to see how it worked out. I dropped the bed hardware in, perfect fit. I gave it about a 10,000th of an inch offset so that it would have just a little bit more wiggle room to fit in there. But like you can see, great fit here. Now that I have the mortises cut for the posts, I'm going to turn my attention to the rails where I'll cut the mortises. I need to use a different approach for this because I have these long pieces and I need to cut those mortises on the end grain. I can't stand that up inside of my shop, so what I found to work for me is set that up at an angle, clamp it in a vise, and instead of using the CNC, which is going to be pretty wobbly at this point and not very comfortable exposing it to this type of risk, I'm going to put on some yellow tape, put a template over that, and I'll be able to remove the yellow tape with a razor, and that shows me exactly where I need to cut, and then I'll go ahead and I'll freehand the mortise from there. And before I cut it, I want to make absolutely sure that these are each going to be exactly the same, so I'm double checking my measurements. Then I move over to the router. I put the bed hardware up. I make sure that I'm at the exact depth I need to be so that this stays flush, the hardware stays flush with the surface once I cut the mortise. And for jobs like this, having something like a headlamp or some other type of light really gives you that extra visibility you need to be as precise as you're able to be. And now that I got the majority removed with the router, I have just a little bit of trim work to do with chisels, and that will give me the fit I need. Now that I have the mortises all prepared and fitting perfectly, I'm going to go ahead and use a hinge bit. These are designed so that you're drilling exactly in the center of each of those holes. And with the mortises prepared, I can direct my attention to those dowels I described at the introduction, the dowels that are going to be drilled into the back side of the bed rails and allow a more secure connection for the screws. So they're not only going into the end grain, but they're also going to have this grain of the dowels to be a more secure connection. And just that little thickness that the yellow tape provides me is going to allow me to saw off these dowels once I get them placed without scratching or otherwise damaging the surface of the rails here. Now that I have everything prepared for the last glue up, what I'm going to do is use a tool called the Domino. This makes sure that I have the right alignment and I don't have one side of my glue up that's creeping up and, you know, a little bit proud and the other side off. I want these to be as flush as I'm able to do this. So it makes a mortise in both surfaces, and then I'll use a piece of wood between them in order to secure that connection. While the headboard is curing, I'm going to turn my attention back to the rails that's going to secure the headboard in place. With the router and a flush trim bit in place, I'm going to go ahead and clean up that little bit of excess that I put on the top and the bottom of those rail pieces and make everything nice and flush. And I'm going to do a quick cleanup pass with the sander to remove any glue that I couldn't quite scrape up. And with those pieces all prepared, I can start turning my attention back to the headboard and footboard posts, where I can mark the places where the headboard panels are going to fit in and the rails are going to attach to. And with those materials prepared, now I have some actual dimensions to go off of, where I'm going to figure out how big of grooves and mortises to put into the posts of the headboard and the footboard to attach those pieces together. I start to make my layout and make sure everything's going to line up just right. So now that the layout lines are all prepared, I'm going to go ahead, use the Domino. I know where I need to make my mortises. I'm going to go ahead, put those in, and I'm creating attachment points for the rails to be able to attach to the posts here. Going back to some of the thin strips that I had milled up earlier, I can go ahead, take those, and use those in order to make those tenons that will create the connection between the rails and the headboard. You can buy these. I also like to make my own at times. I can make them a little bit wider than what you're going to, or a lot wider than what you're going to be able to purchase, and I can make them at my own length. Once the tenons are prepared, I'm able to move on to the posts, which I treat with epoxy. This serves a few different roles. One function of this is going to be sealing up the end grain of that wood, protecting it from wicking up moisture over time if there's a spill. It also protects it as it is moved around so the wood doesn't splinter out at the base. Continuing with the posts, I'm marking out all of the locations where those mortises are going to go, also the grooves that will accept the panels. And with the post prepared, I move over to the router table where I ease those sharp edges of the woods, put a nice 45-degree angle on each of them. The footboard is almost ready for the glue up. I want to make sure while everything is easily accessible, it's a lot nicer to sand it right now. So starting with 100, 120, 150, 180, I move through the different grits and prepare the surface. Then I move back to the epoxy. This time I add a thickener to it. I'm working with a West System Slow Cure Marine Grade epoxy. The thickener keeps that from squeezing out and dripping everywhere as I have my glue up, so it keeps it in place. It also provides me a nice amount of working time so I can get everything lined up and the clamps applied before that glue starts to set. The headboard has the additional step where I've cut tenons into the headboard. These are going to allow it to position in just the right spot inside of the post so it doesn't sit a little bit too low or too high. I do need to allow more of a deeper groove inside of the rails on the headboard, allowing the panel to be able to expand and contract. In those outside tenons on that panel itself, I wanted to make sure I didn't have those too tight. I wanted a little bit more breathing room for those to the panel to expand and contract over time. I've moved on from that, and now I can put the trim piece on the top, which is really solidly going to hold everything in place over time and to keep that from headboard, those posts from loosening up. I've also used that West Systems 2 Slow Cure Marine Grade epoxy on this one. I did use a little bit of thickener in this as well, and then some denatured alcohol works great to clean up any squeeze out that happens. Back to the rails that will hold the headboard and the footboard together. At the top of these, I made a notch that is going to allow me to set that rail into the recess that I had prepared, and then not to be visible from the outside. This should make sense in the next video, but for now you'll just notice I'm real careful to mark that, make sure I'm getting it the right height and right depth, and then I can take and hand saw this and chisel out the rest of it. And if you're still with me, thank you for staying tuned until this point. Make sure to stick around and see what happens in part 3 of this as everything comes together.